Inside with me, Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Today marks China's third Space Day. China has begun the process of selecting its third batch of taikonaut, or Chinese astronauts, and plans to start assembling its space station in the year 2020. It's scheduled to become fully operational around 2022. Besides China, there are also space entrepreneurs out there with the money and the desire to reach for the stars.
It's been 2 decades since the founding of the Taikonaut Brigade of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. 21 taikonauts have since been recruited in 2 batches. There would be as many as 17 to 18 in the third, while their qualifications and skill sets would differ from previous selections.
The
selection process consists of 3 phases, and we will not only select males but also female candidates. The taikonauts will be pilots, maintenance engineers, and payload scientists. The scope will cover not only pilots from the Air Force of People's Liberation Army, but also flight engineers and scientists from related industries, universities, and institutions.
China has long been engaged in space travel. In 2016, China's Long March rocket started its commercial launches for both domestic and overseas clients. China's suborbital space travel, which could spur space tourism, is expected to take off around the year 2025. 50 years after Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to go on a space flight, worldwide commercial companies appear to be on the cusp of a booming space tourism industry. One of them is Jeff Bezos, who started Blue Origin and launched the spacecraft with the biggest window, while Virgin Galactic accomplished a supersonic test flight. Elon Musk co-founded SpaceX and blasted off on its highly anticipated maiden test flight using SpaceX's Falcon Heavy in February this year. That marks one more successful step in the Mars colonization plan.
You could imagine large numbers of those just coming in, landing, taking off, landing, doing many flights per day.
Private space travel is an emerging industry that is changing the way people view the universe. In the last 2 decades, a few adventurous billionaires began investing in it. Russia already sent 7 rich people to space for tourism. Space travel for the masses may no longer be a shot in the dark, thanks to rapid advancements in aerospace technology.
For more on space tourism, we're joining in our Beijing studio Yang Yuguang, who is a professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. Welcome, sir.
Good evening.
Houston, in the U.S., we have Leroy Chiao, who is a former NASA astronaut and International Space Station commander. Welcome as well. I want to begin with you, Mr. Chiao. Commercial flights to the outer space. What exactly is the current stage? Can we really see the success that some of the big names, in a way, in the industry has promised us? Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos.
Right. Well, so, Spaceship One was the first private effort. Oops, we've lost the signal. Getting a dial tone.
All right, we're going to come back to you later. And now let me go
I don't know
to...
if you can still hear me.
Let me go to Yang Yuguang. I can hear you, certainly, but I don't know whether you can hear me. So, Mr. Yang, let's go with you first. Let's go with a question about China. Today is China's Space Day. So, China is preparing another batch of taikonauts, meaning Chinese astronauts. Is China's effort more state-run effort, or is it going to be an overall effort coming from both the state and also the private sector, as well as from other factors of the society?
The answer is both. You know that the current space program, especially the manned space program, is led by the government. But you know that in the recent years, the private sector in space field is developing very fast.
Give me an example.
So in the future, maybe it is possible for the private sector to also entering the field like the manned space flight. Today, we also have many partners in private companies who have already do many contributions to China's manned space program. And also, what you mentioned today during the third Space Day of China, we mentioned that we will select the third batch of astronauts. You know that in the years before, we selected astronauts who will be qualified to be the pilots of the spaceships. But in the future, we will also have mission specialists and also payload experts. In these kind of purposes, the requirement to the astronaut will be greatly reduced. So they don't need to have the capability to driving the spaceship. But still, because you know that during the taking off and during the landing, the spaceship has very crucial conditions. They also need to adapt that.
When you say in the future, what kind of future are you talking about, and how far is the future are we referring to, Mr. Yang?
Well, you know that China will construct its space station before the year 2020 or 2022. After construction of the space station, we will have the more scientific research on board the space station.
And that is the time.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let me have Mr. Chow now. Can you hear me, sir, right now?
Yes, I'm back.
Wonderful. What do you make of China's space development right now? As we mentioned earlier in our background, the third batch of taikonauts or Chinese astronauts are actually already being assembled, and they are likely to take on new missions. So can the two countries, China and the United States, has an opportunity to cooperate? As we have seen, there are fewer and fewer areas, it seems, that the two countries are really working closely together over the past 1 year, to say the least. So do you think that could be an opportunity?
Right. So first of all, I think that China is making very steady progress in their space exploration program, particularly on the human spaceflight side. It's been a deliberate program with each mission doing a little more and more and doing new things. And it's interesting to see that China is now selecting its third astronaut class, and which will include, logically, people from outside of the military, including researchers, people from universities, institutes, and things like that. And that makes sense because China is about to begin construction of their space station, and you're going to need these specialists to operate aboard the station. So as far as the commercial side goes, you know, I think there is opportunity, but as I was saying before, I think we need to be a little cautious because we were over-optimistic back in the early 2000s. As for international cooperation, I've been a big advocate of the U.S. and China working together, in fact, all the international partners. And so my hope is that we can work together, the two countries, in at least a civil space program, because that, in our experience, for example, working with Russia, has brought the two countries, you know, relationships better in all areas. So that is my hope.
Well, working with Russia to a certain extent, within certain time frame, yes, it did work. Professor Yang, what about that possibility? China and the United States cooperation in the space field, we also see there's already a dispute when it comes to the chips. If the chips become difficult, will space cooperation become a possibility?
Well, you may review the history. During the 1990s, China and the United States do have many cooperations, especially the China provides the launch services for the U.S. satellites. But after the millennium, this kind of cooperation, we can seldom see that because the limitation raised by the U.S. Congress. But in recent years, you know that I met many of my friends in international space field, and all my friends from the United States expressed their wish, including Dr. Leroy Chow, the wish to cooperate with China.
But these are technicians and also space people themselves. They are not policymakers. They are not the difficult part. They're actually very much for cooperation, as Mr. Chow just mentioned.
Because you know that in 2014, I met Dr. Charles Bolden in Toronto, and he also expressed his wish to cooperate with China. But he said, first step, I should convince the Congress. Although that he's already retired, but still, many of my friends from NASA also expressed their wish to cooperate with China.
So in the professional fields from both sides, there is a very strong desire of cooperation.
Absolutely.
But of course, political issues could be one of those difficult parts.
In fact, we already have some breakthrough. You know that last year, a Chinese scientific instrument has already onboard the International Space Station. This is an instrument made by the Beijing Institute of Technology, led by Professor Deng Yulin, and with the help of NanoRacks. I also have some friends from NanoRacks. They have provided this kind of services and do not have any complication of the laws of the United States.
What exactly is the function of this machine?
This is a biological experiment, and the samples have been brought back by the Dragon spaceship.
I think we did some programs about that discussion, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Chow, what about the other thing? If international cooperation in China and the United States could be difficult, could there be a door open if it is not state-to-state cooperation? If it is coming from the private sector? For example, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk working with Chinese side on some of the future projects. I don't know whether that could be a possibility. I'm just throwing it out and for you to discuss.
Absolutely, and so on the commercial side, there is definitely more leeway. However, U.S. laws right now, specifically what we call the ITAR laws, prohibit any U.S. citizen from transferring any technology or knowledge about anything related to aerospace without a license, without a specific license from the U.S. government. So in theory, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk and their companies, they could work with Chinese entities, but they would have to get licensed from the U.S. government to work specifically with those entities. So it's a possibility, but it's not easy. But probably easier to do that than right now in the current environment, particularly on the U.S. Congress side of working state to states. Now, you know, Yang Yuguang brought up a good point. We had Charlie Bolden, who was our administrator and a friend of mine. He was very much in favor of working with China. President Barack Obama was also in favor of working with China, particularly in space, and it was a few members of the U.S. Congress that were able to effectively block any effort towards that goal for the entire 8 years of President Obama's administration. So you very, very correctly point out it's really a political question and really up to policymakers to try to figure this out.
All right. If that is a difficult issue to figure out, let's put it aside. Isn't it? I mean, this is the ancient wisdom. You have difficulties, to put it aside and talk about something that is possible. So let's, gentlemen, with your brilliant minds, let's talk about something that is possible. About the commercial flights into the outer space. Mr. Chow, how much do you think responsibility and also in terms of technology development, in terms of carrying people to the outer space, the private sector could carry? And what is going to be the labor of division between, let's just say, the so-called state side and the private side? We understand there's $350 billion when it comes to the industry development, the outer space industry development. So how is that likely to be divided?
Well, of course, there will always be a separation, I think, between government space programs and, of course, commercial space programs. They have very different goals. You know, what is interesting is for the first time you're seeing companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin actually having visionary leaders who want to do exploration, who want to build space infrastructure. And so that's really a departure from the classic model where the commercial companies merely build things under contract for the U.S. government. And so that's very exciting because, for example, Elon Musk wants to colonize Mars. Jeff Bezos wants to build infrastructure around the Earth and around the Moon in order to spur other industries in space. And so this is a very interesting time we're living in, I think.
Mr. Yang, though, to what extent do you think these companies will be able to advance some of the most important technologies when it comes to outer space exploration, or it is only for tourism alone? Meanwhile, do we have commonly shared rules when it comes to tourism from the into the outer space? Will that become a big issue once we got more tourists into the outer space?
You know that for a launch vehicle which can carry a man into space, we call it a human-rated launch vehicle. It has more higher reliability requirement to this kind of launch vehicle than common rockets. So in the future, I still think that it is still a very long way for the private sector to satisfy this kind of requirement.
What about the common rules? Is there common rules about the outer space, Mr. Yang? Could that be also a tricky point among countries?
I think this is also possible. because you know that in the future, this kind of rules is also discussed by the those who study the space laws and other regulations and these kind of issues.
Mr. Chow, what do you make of it? I mean, for now, the outer space ownership is the world, right? It is shared by everybody, and therefore everybody has equal rights to explore it. But how those who have access to the outer space, particularly through tourism, is likely to explore it, and whether it's going to have an impact on others' possibility to do the same, will be a big question.
That's true, and everything right now is run by treaty, which you know, countries have all signed up. Not all, but you know, the spacefaring nations have all signed up for, where nobody can actually own the moon. It's a little bit like the Antarctic. You know, we can have research stations there, we can go do things there, but nobody can claim it and own it. And so that's the state of affairs now. And I think as we evolve into more commercial activities, we will see that the natural evolution will be the regulations and further treaties that will have to be agreed upon by the spacefaring countries. So that's a very good point.
And also the safety of the tourists. That, of course, is a big, big issue. We also learned about certain tragedies over the years when preparing for these trips. So, Mr. Yang, what about that?
Well, that's we've talked to this topic before. You know that the balance between safety and low cost is always a conflict. So the only thing we can do is to how well we keep it. For the commercial space companies, the problem that it seems that people like Elon Musk care more about the low cost. But for a human space flight, I should always emphasize that the safety comes first.
Mr. Chow?
Right, and I absolutely agree. It is a balance. It's you know, very much like commercial airplanes and airliners. Of course, the desire is to make it as safe as possible. You're never going to make it 100% safe, but at the same time, you know, you can only get it to a certain point where you still is commercially viable. And so I think you find that balance very much like the commercial airline industry has found it.
Leroy Chow and Yang Yuguang, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And happy Space Day. Thank you. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.